Before shopping at Lidl again, there are findings you deserve to know. Details that many customers say they only discovered after encountering concerns. Behind the price cuts and public branding sit reports of questionable handling standards, obscured sourcing routes, and internal decision-making driven by aggressive performance targets that few would expect from a UK grocery chain. Over several years, former employees, consumer watchdogs, and food safety observers have compiled statements, audits, and behaviour patterns that paint a more complex picture than the in-store experience suggests. So in this investigation, we step beyond marketing, promotional claims, and curated storefronts to examine what happens behind the scenes. We'll look at documented issues, recurring concerns, and insider accounts that may shift how you view everyday shopping habits. And when we reach the allegation involving mishandled chilled meat stock, you'll see why some shoppers say it fundamentally changed the way they buy food. The price pressure system that sacrifices quality. Lidl has built its reputation on one core promise: lower prices without cutting corners. Shoppers assume that if a supermarket can offer those savings, it must simply be more efficient. Lean staffing, faster logistics, smaller stores. Nothing sinister, just smart business. And most customers trust that the systems behind the scenes are run with safety, fairness, and quality as non-negotiable priorities. But former staff accounts and industry observations suggest that the real engine behind Lidl's price points may be far harsher than the branding implies. Beneath the surface sits an internal pressure model, performance targets, stock turnover demands, and cost control expectations that can push decision-making into uncomfortable territory. Multiple ex-employees have spoken of weekly targets so tight that waste reduction becomes an obsession. Some of these accounts describe instances where the fear of write-offs, loss figures, or failed audits allegedly influences how borderline stock is assessed. Shrinkage, loss, wastage, the numbers matter a lot. When the pressure to minimize waste runs head-to-head with stock quality, the result, according to those describing the system, can be judgment calls that prioritize costs over caution. One former worker claimed that the internal culture often expects miracles during busy weeks, where speed is everything and second-guessing questionable stock can feel like a luxury the shift doesn't allow. None of this means every store behaves the same, but it paints a picture in which the chain's famous low prices come at the cost of constant, almost grinding internal strain. And when strain builds, corners can become temptations. If even a fraction of these claims are true, the impact on shoppers is obvious. Items that should have been more carefully inspected may instead be pushed out for sale. Produce that's still technically okay might be left on shelves longer than ideal. Goods riding the edge of their lifespan could be given the benefit of the doubt because the numbers behind them say they should. For families, elderly customers, and anyone relying on the integrity of what they buy, the risk isn't financial. It's physical, because if judgment slips in the chase for savings, the consequences can end up in someone's shopping trolley, fridge, or plate. And if this kind of pressure sounds worrying, wait until you see how it allegedly affects fresh produce. That's where things get even more uncomfortable. Questions surrounding produce, freshness, and shelf rotation. Most shoppers walk into the fruit and veg section believing that anything on display is safe, fresh, and properly assessed. The visual cues look convincing. Misted displays, trimmed stems, labeled origins, and frequent restocks. Lidl's branding proudly leans on affordability without compromise, which reassures families that they can fill up baskets without worrying about the small print. But the reality behind produce rotation can be far more chaotic than the neat presentation suggests. Several former staff members in publicly shared accounts describe the department as one of the most rushed areas in the entire store. Fast turnover, tight labor hours, and pressure to minimize losses all converge in a corner of the business that relies heavily on judgment calls, not leisurely inspections. The most repeated concern isn't about obvious spoilage, it's about borderline produce, items that are technically in date, but may not actually be at their best. Several accounts speak of fruit and veg being sorted, turned, or rearranged to appear fresher than they really are. One former worker said that at peak times, you do what you can to make it look good, especially when new stock hasn't arrived or waste reports are looming. Another referenced the expectation that if it passes a quick glance, it goes out, because the stockroom is no place for slow decisions in a budget chain. Even something as simple as rotating older produce to the front becomes tricky when the store is understaffed, facing queues, or chasing performance metrics. When speed wins over scrutiny, the question becomes, how fresh is fresh enough? For most shoppers, tired or borderline produce isn't just inconvenient. It can also mean nutritional loss, shortened shelf life at home, and in worst cases, spoilage before anyone realizes. Families planning meals for the week may find items wilting early. Elderly customers, or those with weaker immune systems, are especially vulnerable if produce sits longer than ideal. And when a chain is known for competitive prices, customers often buy in larger quantities, which only increases exposure if quality isn't as consistent as the presentation suggests. Fresh food should feel reliable. When uncertainty enters the picture, trust becomes the first casualty. But if this raises eyebrows, the next revelation digs even deeper because it questions whether some products are as British-sourced as their packaging implies. The supply chain gap. One of Lidl's most powerful selling messages in the UK is its emphasis on British sourcing. Packaging often features bold British flags, seasonal displays reference homegrown farms, and promotional material leans heavily on local identity. For thousands of shoppers, that reassurance is a deciding factor. Buying British feels cleaner, closer to home, and more ethically sound. It suggests shorter transport routes, better freshness, and support for UK agricultural workers, all of which matter deeply to those who are careful about what they bring into their kitchens. And over time, this has created genuine loyalty. Many customers genuinely believe that when they load their baskets with British produce, they're choosing goods that have travelled only modest distances and reflect domestic standards from farm to shelf. But supermarket supply chains can be far more complex than the front-of-pack message implies. Like its competitors, Lidl relies on rapidly shifting procurement routes that change seasonally, logistically, and economically. When crops fail, when demand spikes, or when supply becomes inconsistent, sourcing can widen to include international suppliers, even for items visually framed as British. This doesn't mean false branding, nor that Lidl hides origins. It simply reflects how elastic modern food networks have become. Some produce is grown abroad but processed, packed, or final staged in the UK, which can allow products to sit comfortably under familiar British-style presentation. Shoppers online have occasionally expressed surprise after looking closely at the smallest origin codes, noticing that identical products sometimes alternate between different source countries from week to week. For them, the marketing tone had suggested something much clearer and more consistently domestic. For those who choose Lidl specifically because they want to support British farmers, this difference can feel jarring. When an item has travelled far longer than expected, the unspoken assumptions about freshness start to shift. And for buyers who associate British sourcing with tighter welfare and farming standards, the idea that items may occasionally pass through wider networks introduces questions they never thought to ask. Even when everything complies with regulations, the gap between the simple marketing message and the practical logistics can leave customers feeling that the reality is much less black and white. People don't tend to resent global suppliers, but they do value transparency. When something appears proudly British at a glance, yet may not begin its life on British soil, trust becomes vulnerable. If you found any of this surprising, or you simply appreciate having the fuller picture behind supermarket branding, now is a good moment to support the channel. A quick like tells the platform that conversations like this matter, and subscribing means you won't miss the deeper revelations still to come, especially as we move into departments where handling standards are even more sensitive. Because ultimately, the meaning of British on packaging isn't always as pure or straightforward as shoppers assume. Sometimes it reflects full origin. Sometimes it reflects where final preparation took place. Either way, it's a reminder that assumptions are powerful. And when marketing feels simpler than the supply chain beneath it, customers are right to pause, read labels more closely, and decide for themselves what local truly means. And if this raises questions about origins and labeling, the next section steps inside the store itself, into the world of bakery counters, ready foods, and hands-on preparation, where the smallest oversight can matter far more than most people realize. The prepared foods and deli dilemma. From baked pastries to ready-to-eat meats, Lidl's in-store food selections give the impression of convenience without compromise. The bakery scent, the warm counters, The neatly packaged deli items, all of it creates an expectation that these foods are handled with strict consistency and trained oversight. Most shoppers assume that standards behind the counters match the polish out front. And why wouldn't they? It's food that's meant to be eaten immediately, so the assumption is that care comes first. But staff testimonies and occasional consumer complaints offer a reminder that prepared foods can be the most vulnerable area in any supermarket, simply because they rely on constant, attentive upkeep, something that can be difficult under the rapid pace of budget retail. Several former workers have spoken about the pressures that collide around ready and baked foods: time limits, staff shortages, and constant task switching. Accounts vary, but a consistent theme is that when multiple duties stack up, bakery or deli upkeep can lose the attention it ideally requires. Some employees recall moments where stock rotation, temperature checks, or handling protocols reportedly became rushed or irregular during busy stretches. Others mention that training for these departments can differ from store to store, meaning that procedures may rely heavily on whoever is on shift that day. This doesn't prove widespread misconduct, but it highlights how easily small oversights can happen when the environment is designed for speed. A few consumer complaints online have echoed similar concerns, pointing to items that felt unusually dry, past their expected freshness, or inconsistently presented. Prepared food is particularly sensitive. Slight gaps in handling, whether timing, storage, or temperature related, can affect shelf life, flavor quality, and in rare cases, safety. For families grabbing quick lunches, workers eating on the go, or elderly customers trusting the convenience options, even minor inconsistencies can undermine confidence. When a supermarket is busy and the focus is on throughput and waste reduction, a deli counter or pastry rack might not receive the minute-by-minute care shoppers naturally assume. And while most items are fine, the fact that procedures rely so much on pace, staffing levels, and experience means standards can feel less rigid than they appear from the front of the display. But if bakery trays and deli shelves raise concerns, the next revelation goes a step further, because it focuses on refrigerated meats and stockroom handling, where mistakes matter even more. Alleged stockroom practices on meat and refrigerated goods. If there is any area in a supermarket where precision truly matters, it's the chilled section. Whether it's packaged meats, dairy, or other perishable items, customers naturally trust that strict handling protocols are followed from delivery to display. Refrigeration temperatures, rotation of stock, and careful date checking are assumed standards, and most shoppers take them for granted. If something reaches the shelf, the expectation is that it has been properly managed every step of the way. Lidl's presentation of chilled products is tidy and professional, and that visual order reassures buyers. It suggests consistency, attentiveness, and an unwavering commitment to food safety. However, discussions from former employees and scattered consumer reports online raise questions about how challenging those standards can become behind the scenes. Meat, fish, dairy, and other chilled items require constant vigilance, correct storage temperatures, tight sell-by management, and meticulous rotation practices. But staff testimonies describe environments where stockrooms are busy, storage space is tight, and deadlines push teams to work at speed, especially during peak seasons, promotional weeks, or deliveries that arrive later than expected. In such fast-moving conditions, some workers have claimed that stock decisions were occasionally rushed, with borderline products or nearing date items having to be assessed quickly rather than cautiously. Others have mentioned that when demand spikes, prioritizing display over rigorous inspection can feel like an unavoidable trade-off. To be clear, none of these accounts confirm widespread wrongdoing, nor do they suggest every store operates this way, but they do reveal how easily chilled stock can become a pressure point in a retail model built around efficiency and cost control. For customers, any uncertainty in chilled handling is understandably unsettling. Meat and dairy require the most delicate care. They are susceptible to time, temperature, and storage conditions in ways that ambient goods simply aren't. If monitoring becomes rushed, the result could be shorter product life at home, unexpected spoilage, or reduced quality by the time a shopper opens the packaging. Families cooking for children, individuals with dietary vulnerabilities, or anyone concerned about food, freshness may feel uneasy at the thought that speed and logistics could occasionally overtake caution. Even if most items are perfectly fine, The possibility of inconsistency challenges the quiet confidence shoppers rely on when choosing fresh goods. And if chilled stockrooms raise questions, the next revelation steps beyond storage altogether, because it looks at the patterns found in customer complaints and what those patterns suggest when viewed side by side. Recurring customer complaints. Every supermarket attracts complaints. It's inevitable. Packaging tears, bruised produce, damaged labels, items past their best, stock shortages. Most shoppers accept these as occasional slip-ups. And for a low-cost retailer, people often shrug and say, well, it's cheaper, isn't it? Lidl, like its competitors, has systems in place for feedback, returns, and investigation. On the surface, this reassures customers that issues are taken seriously and fixed at source. But when similar concerns keep surfacing across different regions, times, and product categories, people begin to wonder whether isolated mishaps are actually signaling a wider pattern. A scroll through public reviews, watchdog reports, community forums, and consumer stories reveals recurring themes that echo the internal pressures mentioned earlier. Some shoppers describe unexpected quality dips in products that previously seemed reliable. Others report inconsistent packaging integrity, dented tins, vacuum seals that didn't hold, or items that appeared older than expected once opened at home. None of these points, individually, prove systematic failure, but collectively, they create a trail of familiar complaint topics. Comments about freshness, irregularities in appearance, surprising best-before margins, or occasional foreign objects inside packaging have appeared more than once in online discussions. Even more telling are stories of customers returning to the same concerns after having stopped shopping in Lidl previously, hoping standards had changed only to encounter similar experiences. These anecdotal patterns can't be treated as evidence of widespread issues, but they do show that certain worry points persist strongly enough to leave a mark on public perception. For everyday shoppers who simply want value without uncertainty, repetition matters. When similar complaint types continue to appear, it chips away at confidence. People start asking whether the savings are worth the risk of disappointment, especially when buying food they plan to eat, feed to children, or cook for vulnerable relatives. And even if most products are perfectly fine, the possibility that quality varies by batch, store, or handling pace can leave customers feeling less secure about what's ending up in their baskets. Trust is fragile. Once cracks start showing, people become hyper-aware, and every imperfect item on a shelf feels heavier than it should. And if repeated complaints are concerning, the final revelation goes somewhere even deeper, because it looks at the staffing model itself and what happens when the people responsible for quality control are stretched thinner than most shoppers realize. High turnover, high pressure, limited time for training. Most shoppers rarely think about the people behind the shelves, the staff, stacking chilled goods, rotating produce, or checking packaging before it reaches the shop floor. We assume that every worker has been fully trained, given adequate time to follow procedures, and supported by a team large enough to handle busy periods without cutting corners. Supermarkets are big, established institutions. With food safety at stake, it's natural to believe that everything is tightly managed and carefully overseen. Lidl stores are often run with small teams, lean scheduling, and emphasis on quick task completion. To customers, that simply looks efficient. Low staff numbers mean lower costs, which in turn means lower prices, the core brand identity. On the surface, it feels like a tidy, streamlined system, but former workers have described a very different side to that efficiency. Some accounts mention fast turnover, steep learning curves, and limited training time due to workload and staffing constraints. Reports vary, but many describe the same root issue. There isn't always room for slow, methodical coaching when a handful of employees are simultaneously running tills, restocking chilled sections, rotating fruit and veg, cleaning spillages, and preparing baked goods, often all in the same shift. When the environment is this fast-moving, even well-intentioned staff can find themselves rushing handling tasks, making judgment calls under pressure, or leaning on limited experience while trying to meet time expectations. One former employee publicly reflected that you learn on the move because there isn't time to stop. Another said that when rotas get stretched, people do their best, but you can't watch everything at once. Again, none of this proves that mistakes are guaranteed. But it does reveal how vulnerable standards can be when so much responsibility rests on too few shoulders, especially when those shoulders may belong to newer staff still finding their footing. For shoppers, this matters because every aspect of in-store quality, temperature checks, date rotation, packaging inspection, product handling, relies on the people doing it. When teams are small, turnover is high, and training time is tight, the potential for oversight becomes greater, not out of neglect, but out of sheer pressure. Families, elderly customers, or anyone who assumes an invisible army is standing guard over every product might be surprised to learn that the reality behind the scenes can be far more stretched and frantic than they imagined. And in an environment where speed is celebrated, meticulous caution can sometimes be the first casualty. And if all of these revelations felt eye-opening, stay with me, because now we've reached the end of the investigation, it's time to pull the threads together, lay out the clearest lessons, and look at what shoppers should do next. What this all means for shoppers. After all these concerns, testimonies, and recurring themes, one thing becomes clear. Lidl isn't a villain, nor is it uniquely flawed. It is a cost-driven supermarket operating at speed. And within that model, pressures exist that can affect quality, transparency, and consistency in ways most customers never see. None of the revelations here prove that every store behaves the same, or that every product carries risk. But they do highlight patterns worth paying attention to. Intense internal targets, complicated sourcing routes, rushed produce handling, sensitive stockroom decisions, recurring customer complaints, and staffing stretched thin. Together, these threads form a picture that should encourage shoppers to stay more alert, ask more questions, and never assume that price alone tells the full story. So what should you do? Be selective, check dates closely, especially on chilled and fresh goods. Examine packaging integrity before you buy. Don't be afraid to return items that fall short. Feedback forces improvement. And most importantly, shop with awareness rather than blind trust. Supermarket polish can hide a lot, and caution costs nothing. If value matters to you, and especially if you're buying for children, elderly relatives, or anyone vulnerable, take that extra second to inspect what goes into your basket. The safest shopper is the one who treats every supermarket, not just Lidl, with informed scrutiny. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a great experience, or a worrying one, at Lidl or any other budget chain? Was it a product, a quality issue, or something you saw behind the shelves? Share your stories in the comments below. Your voice may help someone else shop more safely. And if you found this investigation useful, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with family and friends and spread the awareness. More eyes, more caution, fewer risks. If you want more deep dives, more exposés, and more behind-the-scenes breakdowns of how our everyday world really works, hit subscribe, because there's always more to uncover.